Welcome back. I hope everybody had a good lunch. This portion of the program is going to be personal stories of events leading up to the 1980 mandali ringing the bell of warning. So we're going to start to get a feeling of what was going on as Sufism started to move toward Mackay taking over, and some of the events that were happening that were getting back to the mandali, to sort of what stirred Erich in the way when he wrote that letter. So we're going to hear from, this afternoon, we're going to hear from Ed van Buskirk and Ursula Reinhart and Deborah Tyler. And Ursula met Baba in 1966, the same year she met Ivy Deuce. After a long friendship with Ivy Deuce, Ursula became a Sufi in 1976, but had reservations after the induction of Mackay. She will tell her story of her relationship with Sufism and with Meher Baba's mandali in India. Ed van Buskirk first heard of Meher Baba in 1967 and began attending Meher Baba League meetings in 1968. Ed went to the Great Darshan in 1969, and he was initiated into Sufism Reoriented in 1977 and released from his vows in 1980.
Jai Baba. Before, Ursula and I are going to tell our stories, and they kind of we're going to try and do it chronologically. They intersect at certain points, so we'll kind of work off one another. But before we begin, is this okay, or is it too loud? Or I'm going to talk about things that were my personal story with Sufism and all that stuff that I haven't really talked about for 35 years. And when I have talked about it, I found it's been upsetting to some people. So in thinking about doing this, what kept coming back to me is in 1969, as we were, after the Darshan program, we were on the plane in Bombay, waiting to take off. And I don't know where we were. We were so out there after the Darshan. But I remember Fred Winterfeld got up in the aisle, and he took the microphone that the flight attendant uses, and he read out the message that Baba had given for the Darshan. And the message started, "Be true to the trust I repose in you." There might have been more to the message, and I didn't get it, because that just knocked me out right there. And it's something I never forgot. I can still see Fred doing that. And it comes up all the time, and it's kind of a handy thing to have if you're trying to follow Baba, because it kind of applies to any situation, I think. So anyhow, that's what kept coming up to me in this, is to be true to the trust reposed in me. And what that means to me in this context is, number one, you have to be honest. Baba always said, speak your truth. But at the same time, do it in such a way that you're respectful of others and of others' feelings and their path, which sometimes seems like it's a little bit impossible. Another thing that came up to me was, and again I can see it right now, is during the Darshan that Mani said, you know, Baba, he asked you to stand up and sit down at the same time. And that's, of course, true. I mean, we have people do things. In the mid-'60s, I was in a poster business in Berkeley, California. We produced posters, and in later years, those posters have become quite valuable. Things that we used to sell for $1 or $2, now some of them sell for $5,000, $10,000. It so happens that one of the people who is in that business of pushing those, not pushing, but putting on shows, is a patient of mine. And he found out I was in this Berkeley Bonaparte, and he said, oh, can you tell me everything about it? So I said, yeah. So I went on the internet and Googled it, and there's a couple pages of things on there, and every bit of it was wrong. It was just, what? People put their own, whatever they thought about it, and that's what became the reality. And I've seen some of that same thing happen with this history we're going to talk about now. So that's another thing that motivated me. And, you know, when Baba gave us what he's given us in terms of the theme of creation, he made it so simple, the divine theme and the return of the soul to the oversoul, the purpose of life. He used a beautiful figure that there's this endless procession, all going in the same direction towards the goal. And at the very front of the procession is, of course, the avatar, who's leading everyone. And those up very close to the front are those who are with the avatar and who are part of his advent, part of his mission. And those a little closer, not quite as close, who are quite aware that it's the avatar who's doing things, and they know his name, and they know he's the doer. And then as you go back, they're, you know, decreasing amounts of awareness. And the vast majority of the procession, they don't know anything's going on. They're just moving because the procession's moving. And so I thought about, why are we here today? Not just why are we here today, but why are we all here now in this time? And it's if you're here listening to this, it's because you're up close to the head of that procession. And so I think and that includes everybody who's a Baba lover, Sufis, whoever, everybody. And I think it's good that we remember that, and that we can talk about our differences, but do it in such a way that we respect each other's path, because everybody took their own path to get to this place in the procession. So I'm going to have Ursula begin, because her history with this whole thing, it was before me, and we'll go back and forth from there. I'll get the cane, I'll pull the cane.
Okay. Jai Baba. I met Baba on March 7th, 1966 at Merida. And after meeting Baba, who instructed us to go back to the United States and persuade young people from taking drugs, we moved, my ex-husband, Mick Hamilton, and we moved to Santa Barbara. And while in California, we came up to San Francisco, and in 1966 at the Sufi Center in San Francisco, I met Ivy Deuce and Dawn Stevens. And I remember Ivy Deuce saying, oh, how much trouble she had with the young people taking drugs and how important that was. And she was sort of indicating that she was inundated with young people who were all taking drugs, and that was, so she agreed that that was very important work that Baba wanted us to do. Then we did some traveling, and we came back to California in 1968, and somehow I met Ivy Deuce again, and she sort of took a liking to me and invited me to her home on Nob Hill. She lived in some very fancy apartment in San Francisco, and she had a Chinese butler who stood, he was the servant standing in the corner, and she would invite me for tea, and I sort of had the sneaky suspicion she enjoyed gossiping with me, because somehow that seems to be something that I knew how to do, I guess. And she would always want to know everything about everybody. And I would go there and have tea with her, and we were buddies, we were friends. What was interesting was I was in the process of contemplating a divorce from Mick Hamilton for whatever reason. And she had her astrologer do Mick and my chart, Sylvia DeLong from Florida, to our chart to see whether or not we were compatible or whether we should be married or divorced. And it was interesting, the woman did my chart, and later on other astrologers did my chart, and she was wrong. She did not know that Germany was under wartime when I was born, and my chart was an hour off, which is a huge difference. So I'm just saying that because she based people's life decisions on this astrological person that wasn't apparently very good at her craft, but such it goes. So after I was divorced. I used to also go to visit her, and then I had a Baba boyfriend. And one day she informed me that she had this woman who was psychic, and her name was Irene Dahm, and her name for the connection she had with the, I don't know, some astral world or something, was Moreau. And Merida told me that she used this woman who was very psychic and very well knew her abilities, and she used this woman for advice for her and her students, because as Baba told her that he would help her, but apparently that may not have been enough, I don't know. But she had this psychic woman. And so without asking me, in my opinion, or whether even my permission, she asked this psychic woman about my relationship to my boyfriend. And back came this absolute bizarre past life story that I cannot repeat as to the connection he and I had. And I remember telling him about it. He was so angry. It was like an invasion of one's privacy to come up with this nonsense. Anyway, this is how she was. She liked the psychics and she liked the astrologers, and she clearly used that as a tool for helping her Murids, or in my case, her friends. After Rick and I, like earlier Lisa said, and Mick and all, we did the Berkeley Baba group, I sort of drifted away when Roger Blewett and that group took over. It was kind of like a Sufi satellite or something. And I became a private eye in San Francisco. And my life was really, really wild. I did a lot of wild driving, and I carried a gun, and I was living some other sort of life. And somewhere in that I felt I need religion. My God, what am I doing here? I need something. So I went to see my old friend Ivy Deuce, who of course encouraged me to become a Sufi. So I took the candidates classes in 1975, and I remember that I took them with Pete Townsend, and we used to sit together and go, I don't know, this is kind of odd. But anyway, Pete went back to London, and I became a Sufi. And the day I was initiated into the Sufi order was March 3rd, 1976. There was also Rick Chapman's wedding day. And during the day, we all went to Rick's wedding, and in the evening I went to the Sufi Center to be initiated into the Sufi order. And I remember Alan Cohen saying, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to become a Sufi." And he said, "No, you're not. You're here to investigate us." You're here to investigate us. Because I was a private eye, but in a way he was sort of right, and I just didn't know it yet. What was interesting about my initiation was the guest speaker to our initiation was Irene Dahm Moreau, the psychic, and talking about all this otherworldly stuff that she gleaned from wherever psychics get. It was really bizarre. But at the end of Irene's talk, the initiation process was to happen. And Kitty Davey and Laura Delevingne were in town for Rick Chapman's wedding. And so a couple of Sufis politely went up to Kitty Davey and Laura Delevingne and said, "This is the initiation, which is private, and you need to go outside now and wait outside." And the punchline is Laura Delevingne said, "What are you talking about? I was initiated by Inayat Khan." So anyway, so after then being a Sufi for a while, I remember that I don't know exactly what happened to Irene Moreau. She sort of faded away. But for a while then, Merida had someone else that she felt was a psychic, and there was Alan Ewell. And I remember she wanted me to have an interview with Alan Ewell, and I refused. I said, absolutely not. I will not. So the first couple of years of my Sufihood were kind of uneventful. And in 1977, Ed and I decided to get married, and with Ivy Deuce's blessing. And Ed became a Sufi, and we got married. Is this where you're supposed to come back in? Mm-hmm. Ah, okay. Then I'll talk about more stuff after that.
So, just to catch up to that point, my first contact with Sufism was when I started going to the Baba League in 1967, 68. And at that time, I owned the Arbor Cafe, so I sort of had a thing I was doing in life, but it was not all that stable and all that. And I wasn't sure I was going to continue doing that. But anyway, in 1968, I took the candidates classes in San Francisco. I think there were 10 or 12 classes. And then after that, if you had further interest, you would indicate that, and you would get an interview with a preceptor. I think it was either Lud or Selma Hassan at the time. So I got through the candidates classes, and they were interesting, but I didn't have any real burning desire. I was kind of ambivalent about whether I should be a Sufi. So I said, well, I'll find out. I'll go schedule an interview. So I went and I talked with Lud Dimphel in his home in, where was that? Huh? Kentfield, right. Beautiful home, and sat in his study, and we interviewed. And he said, well, it doesn't sound like you're at the place in your life where you're ready to take this on. But when you get to that place, meaning when you're more stable in your path and so forth, if you have continued interest, by all means, come back. So I thought, well, that sort of resolves it. You know, I was neither here nor there really about it. I went away then, shortly thereafter, I moved to Iowa to go to chiropractic school, and came back in 1974 here. Had a little bit to do with the Baba group at the time, but not that much. I was more interested in getting my practice going and everything I had to do about that. And then in 1976, after Ursula became a Sufi, we were going out together, and we were friends from before, and it looked like, okay, well, it's time to get married. So she went to ask Merida, as I recall, permission to marry me, and Merida, who I did not know, wanted to speak with me. And so I went and met her, and she approved of the marriage, and that would be fine, and suggested that I may want to become a Sufi. Well, I still didn't have any real burning desire one way or the other, but I said, well, this is the way it's working out, so this is Baba's plan for me, I guess. And so in 1977, I was initiated into Sufism. Now I knew some Sufis, and I knew a little bit about what kind of came out of there. And I did have some concerns because I knew they were, at that time, pretty into psychics and past lives and all that kind of stuff, which I wasn't interested in, and I had a sort of I stay away from that. But it didn't seem to concern me. Nobody ever asked me to do any of that, so I just sort of steered clear of it and tried to focus on Sufism. The other thing that would happen is that Merida would tell people that it was really only necessary to go to India once, as she put it, to pay your respects to Baba. And I understood that. I mean, your path is wherever you are. So if you're a serious spiritual student, you shouldn't have to be dependent on that. But at the same time, I said, I'm going to go to India because the mandali are still there. And that was a special time. So we never really asked permission to go, and nobody said anything about it. We went a lot. In fact, we led groups of Sufis who would go. We would take them to India. So that seemed to be okay. But on our return from those trips, Merida was invariably have Ursula and I come over for an appointment, and she would sort of get the gossip and get the, all of that. And during those times, I sort of started to sense that there was a gap between Sufism and the mandali. She sometimes was flat out disrespectful of the mandali or dismissive. One time I told her, when I was there this time I met Don Stevens, who I'd never met before, and I said he was really a gentleman. And Merida said, well, I taught him everything he knows. And she was dismissive of him, and I didn't know their whole history at that time. So I used to think about that stuff, and there a couple times she made comments that really kind of troubled me, but I said, well, it's none of my business. And I intended to continue going to India. And I remember, I think it was either late 77, I don't have the exact dates, or 1978, one night at a Friday night meeting, the guest speaker was this Dr. James Mackay, who I'd never heard of. And he came in and he talked about his trip to India when he went to all the tombs of the perfect masters. And what he talked about is, I guess the best way to put it was kind of the vibrations that he picked up at those places, what the energy was and how it affected him. And it was interesting in a way because there was so much variations between them, and so I didn't think that much of it. But it was kind of an interesting talk. He's kind of a strange guy, the way he moves and all that. But so I was a little bit intrigued, and then he started to have these seminars, I guess you'd call them. The first ones were in Berkeley, at UC campus, where he would talk with people. And that's when it started to come out that he was talking about stuff that I thought, well, I'm not so sure about this, about energies and this and that. And so I started to have a little bit of hesitancy about it. Then Merida asked us to have a private interview. I don't know if she asked everybody in Sufism, but certainly Ursula and I were asked to have a private interview with Jim Mackay. And that one was a little strange because he started to talk about, in general terms, about my past lives and stuff like that. And that he said, oh, you were really in a tough situation and you did pretty well and this and that. General stuff. And he more concerned with me as a healer, I'm a chiropractor. And he talked a lot about who are your patients and, what do you do with them? And we talked, this entire time he had his eyes closed and he was sort of in a different space, obviously. And I had more reluctance after that. In 1979, Ursula went to India with Phyllis Frederick. I think Ursula had won the trip at the LA Sahavas and given the ticket to Phyllis, and Phyllis then asked her to accompany. So that was November 1979. And so they went off, and Ursula was being concerned about this Mackay thing, and she was quite concerned that I was being attracted to it, where she had other feelings. Well, during the time they were away, I got a call, and I was asked to go to a dinner meeting for healthcare workers with Dr. Mackay. And by this time, things had gotten strange around Sufism. There was a kind of a cult following around Mackay, and people started dressing like him, and they acted strange. And it was not everybody, but there was enough people. It was sort of like they had their own little club, and you didn't really know what was going on, but you were supposed to think it was pretty special, I guess. And people started smoking because he smoked. I said, that's a little bit going backwards, I think. And there was a lot of that kind of imitative behavior. So I was asked to go to this meeting, a dinner meeting, and I called my preceptor, Marge Rogers, and I said, am I expected to go to this? Do I have to go? She said, why, you don't want to go? I said, no, I don't want to go. So she called Merida, and Merida got the message back, go. So I went, and that was a weird one. I went there, and it was very formal. Everybody was dressed kind of formally. It was sort of like, I don't know what it was. It was different than it had ever been. And everybody was sort of hovering around and moving around, and I sort of felt out of it. And then Dr. Mackay, he was not, I don't know if he'd been initiated yet, comes walking down the steps from the upstairs in a flowing things, and he had garlands around his neck. And as he came down, the petals from the garland started falling off on the floor. And people start diving for those petals. It was a very strange thing. I just went, wow. And there was a very worshipful kind of vibe about the whole thing. And what immediately came into my mind was the last sentence of the Master's Prayer. You are named Izad, the only one worthy of worship. Then, so I was a little ill at ease at this dinner. So then Dr. Mackay, they had, I think, 2 or 3 tables set, and he seated everybody. And he had, you sit here and you sit here. And he was at the head of this table. And at the other end of the table, the long table, was Carol Whalen, who's now Merida Connor. And right next to her on either side, it was me on one side, Elaine Ewell on the other. And I said, well, that's kind of a weird setup. And every time I looked up during this dinner, virtually every time, he was focusing on me and doing this kind of stuff. And it was like I'm not very sensitive in that regard, but I felt it was very invasive, and I didn't like it at all. I thought it was manipulative. Just wasn't into it. I kind of wanted to get out of there, but then everybody went in the living room and sat on the floor, and he sat on a chair, and there were, 30, 35, 40 people. And I was sort of wedged in to a place where I couldn't easily get out. And sometimes somebody played some music, but the entire focus was on him. Everybody was sitting in a very adoration type situation. And it was going on, and it was going on, and it was getting more uncomfortable. And what came to me at that time was I had, in 1976, I was at Amartiti in Mehrabad, and the Society for Avatar Mehrabad bought a film that they had made, and it was about the Samadhi and stuff like that. And in the film, Dr. Harry Kenmore, who was a blind chiropractor, who was the head of the society, and who Baba said was one of his Western mandali, Harry was blind, and Harry's a very brash, loud voice. He's talking on the film. He said, I never saw the Avatar's face. I never heard his voice, but I knew what it felt like to be in his presence. And when I came into that samadhi, that's what it felt like. And I immediately said, I know what it feels like to be in Baba's presence too. And it didn't feel anything like what was going on in that room. So I was sort of in my mind and everything, I was out. But I had taken these vows to have faith and trust in the Murshid. So I don't know, do you just walk out on something because you don't like the direction it's going? So I was a little stuck there. And then, where'd she go? I had a phone call from Ursula, who was returning. She was in Tokyo, and she called from Tokyo. And I'll let her tell you what that's about, and then I'll go on.
All right, where was I? No, not yet. I'm backing up. So the first time that I remember James Mackay being introduced to the Sufi order actually was not him in person, but it was a tape. And I remember Ivy Deuce saying, now he's a little bit odd and you should take it with a grain of salt, actually. And it was a tape of him going to one of the tombs of the Perfect Masters, and we were told that there would be consequent tapes of the other tombs of the Perfect Masters that he had visited when he was in India with his group in, I think, 1976 or 7. And some of the talk he was present and others were by tape. And when we saw Mayor Baba, and we corresponded with him until late in his life, one thing that Baba told Mick and I was not to go to the tombs of the perfect masters, except for Baba Jan. And Baba told Robert that, Baba told Rick that, Baba told Jim McGrew that, Steve Simon. Everyone I knew that met Baba after 62, like we did, was told not to go to the tombs of the perfect masters. And he explained to us the reason for it was that people who go there leave their sanskaras and dump whatever it is they wish to give to these perfect masters. However, they do not have the power to clean that up. So around those tombs, this muck kind of stacks up, and that we are not to subject ourselves to that. In fact, Baba made that very clear when we were in Iran with Robert, and we went to the tomb of Hafiz. We wrote to Baba, "Oh, Baba, we went to the tomb of Hafiz, your favorite poet." Got a letter back, "No tombs, don't go." So I thought I was, meanwhile, Ivy Deuce and my beloved husband had talked me out of being a private eye because that was so dangerous and I shouldn't have this job, and so they somehow talked me out of being a private investigator. And Ivy Deuce thought I would make a good travel agent because I've been around the world a few times. So I became the Sufi travel agent. And this was a good deal because you have 500 customers immediately. And we started taking tours to India. We usually went twice a year, and sometimes Ed came and sometimes he didn't. And I would take Sufis and others to India because she felt that Sufis should go once to pay their respects, and a lot of them were too shy or didn't want to travel alone. So every time we came back from one of those trips, we would be debriefed by Merida, and as Ed said, sometimes that wasn't very. I remember I brought her prasad that Mehra gave me for Merida, and she put it aside and she said, "I wouldn't eat that. I don't know where that's been." And that she referred to the women mandali as the girls, and she sort of intimated that they were probably kind of getting dementia and getting old, and I did not sense a respect from her, but that's sort of how it was. Anyway, so after these tapes about the tombs, I wrote her a little letter and I said, by the way, because what I thought is happening now, that the next groups I take to India, they're going to ask me to run around these tombs with my charges, and I did not want to do that. So I wrote her a letter and I told her that Baba had asked all of us not to go to these tombs. And I think that was somehow a declaration of something, an opposition, because she did not answer me. The next Friday meeting, she said, and then someone objected to my comment about going to the tombs of the perfect masters, and I just want to tell that someone that was a personal order and has nothing to do with anyone in the room here. So then there were more talks by Mackay, either on tape or in person. And some of the things that he was talking about, the unwinding of the sanskaras and the cleaning up of the strings and the threads and all that, and the planes of consciousness. I don't know much about it, but I do know a little bit, having read God Speaks 5 times. There were things that he said that were against what Baba said in God Speaks. So I did what one does. I called my preceptor, who was Khalid Al-Faqih, and I said, "Khalid, I have a problem." And I met with him, and I explained to him that what this guy said on Friday is not what Baba said. And Khalid agreed with me. And in fact, he agreed with me that he thought this fellow was really strange. And I discussed with Khalid that the direction this is going, I'm not sure that I can stick around. This is not, I really am not liking this. And the comment was very interesting from Khalid. He said he agreed with me that this was really strange and other and different and not Baba-like. And he said, but I have no choice. He said, I have no choice. My entire family are Sufis. All of my brothers and sisters are Sufis. All my friends are Sufis. And I'm a chiropractor, and all my patients are Sufis. I have no life without that. I have no choice. I have to stay here. And then the next time I called him to complain about whatever Mackay said, he said, I can no longer help you. You have to go to see Merida. So I made an appointment with Merida, and I had God Speaks under my arm, and I'm pounding, this is what he said on yesterday, and this is what Baba said here. And at one point, I kind of had her against the wall because, and I don't remember exactly what the issue was, but there's nothing she could say. And she stood up and she said, I am your Merida. And that was the end of the interview. And that's sort of how that went. So I was so alarmed by this that I thought I need to speak to somebody. And I had been to India a bunch, but I didn't really have a very close relationship with any of the mandali. The one that I really liked was Adi K. Irani. He was my buddy. And he took us to see Baba in 1966, so we had a special friendship with him. So Phyllis, I won the LA tour, Baba India ticket. Actually, Phyllis said to me, did you buy a raffle ticket? And I said, no, Phyllis, I'm a travel agent. I paid 25% of a regular ticket. It would be like Coles to Newcastle. Phyllis said, you buy a raffle ticket. And I said, Phyllis, if I win, I'll give it to you. She said, you buy one. I won, and I handed it to her. So anyway, we went to India together, and I didn't say anything to anyone, and I made an appointment to see Adi, and I told Adi I wanted to talk to him about Mackay. He had met him in Washington, Adi had. And this is how it happened in Meher Baba's name. Adi said to me, Adi was cleaning one of his tools. He had a pegboard next to his desk and with his hooks, and there were hammers and whatnot, and he had a wrench in his hand. And I asked him what to do about Sufism and this Mackay, and you've met him. And Adi started beating the wrench on his desk, loud, whap, whap, and he started shouting, this man is a charlatan. You get out of there. You have no business being in there. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. The man is freaking out. And I did not expect that reaction. He was livid. And I said, but Adi, I think Ed might actually be liking him, because Ed had gone to some of those seminars, and he was, seemed like he liked the guy's intellect or something at that before I left. And Adi said, then you leave him. What is a husband? You need to stay with Baba, and that's all you need to do. It was shocking. It was really shocking to me. And it was so overwhelming that I couldn't call from India. This wasn't at a time that 79 one could easily make phone calls. So I called him from Tokyo to say, Adi said stay away from him. So I came back, and now it was the very end of 79, and Adi was to come in the spring of 1980. So Ed and I talked about what are we going to do. And we decided we'll let Adi handle it. Adi's coming in the spring. He will come to Sufism with that kind of vibe that he has. This man is a charlatan. He will stand up there and, like the temple, throw out the money changes. And somehow we were under the impression Adi's going to clean house, he's going to take care of it, and Merida and the Sufis will all see the light, and it'll be wonderful. Adi is going to take care. He's the charge man. And on March 4th, 1980, Adi died. And we said, oh, now what are we to do? Meanwhile, I had another thought that was when Lisa was talking about Dick Anthony inviting Merida to the Berkeley Baba group. in 79 to discuss whatever, where she came to give a talk. It was the same evening that we had a Sufi meeting, and we were told that Merida was at the Berkeley Baba group, and we were asked as Sufis to protect her from y'all. And the way we were asked to do that is that a song had been written, and I can't say for sure if it was Hank Midland or not, but somebody had written a song, and we, in rounds, were asked to sing this song for an hour, hour and a half, in rounds. And the words were, "O Merida, our lives are leaves upon your tree. O Merida, we have no existence apart from thee. O Merida, the sound of your name runs through our veins," or something. The pattern of the sound of your name runs through our veins. And I remember Ed and I sitting there, quiet. I couldn't get myself to do it, but this was sung for an hour, that our lives are leaves upon her tree. We have no existence apart from thee, meaning her, I guess. So this was kind of the way it was turning. And then Merida asked me to have a personal interview with Dr. Mackay, and I went. And he asked me to close my eyes, which I didn't do, but he closed his eyes and he directed the traffic of the universe or something. He would turn his head and whirl his arms in a very bizarre way. And he told me certain things about my past lives, for whatever that was worth. And he also said that I had this brilliant light energy coming out. And I remember I cracked up laughing and I said, "That's the funniest thing I ever heard. You got to be kidding me." And he was really offended. It was obviously that was not, anyone wouldn't talk to him about that. But in hindsight, I thought about, what was that all about? And I got it. I suddenly understood how he worked and what he was doing. And people would always say, the mandali would say, everybody would say, "What about these intelligent people? There was Lat Dimfel, there was Alan Cohen. How about these intelligent people? How can they all be following this man?" He got people at their spiritual ego. And that's what he was trying to do with me, to tell me I could have hooked into that hook, line, and sinker. "Ooh, wow, I got this light. Oh, hey, tell me more, tell me more." And people were addicted to that, and they wanted more of that. And this is why they were attached to him, and this is how he got them. And anyway, that's my sense. I may be wrong, but I think that's sort of how it went. I suppose you all know Hermes, who is dearly departed. May he rest in peace. Mackay told him he was on the fourth plane. The fourth. I mean, you all maybe know what that means. He could create new universes. There you go, like Jesus. So it was really, really amazing. Okay, so then Ed and I decided to go to India to speak to the mandali about it after Adi passed away. And we went there, just a second. We went there, and we thought we were going to talk to Mani and maybe Erich. So Ed, I think, asked Mani, "We would like to talk to you." And she said, "Ed, we would like to talk to you." And the next thing that happened was they announced that it was a Sunday, Merida was closed, which is unheard of. People go, "What, Merida's closed? What do you mean?" And they asked Ed and I to come at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday to meet with them. And the only other time I ever had an appointment at Merida at 9 o'clock in the morning was to meet Baba. So for me, to be at Merida at 9 in the morning had a huge impact. And we went out there, and we were walked into a room, and present were every living mandali without the exception of Mera. There were like 16 of them. And Ed is going to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll go on.
I'll just finish my story, because when she came back from Tokyo, I wanted to leave Sufism then, but we decided, well, Adi's going to come and we'll hang out. And then Adi passed away, and it was a Tuesday. I got a call in the morning. That night was my class, my Gothic class, at 7:30. It's coincided exactly with the time of Adi's burial at Merida. So when I got to the Gothic class, I announced it to the class. Absolutely no response, no anything. It was just flat. That was strange. That Friday night, the Friday night meeting, was Mackay. And all he did was this for most of the meeting. And I was about ready to jump up and leave. At the end of the meeting, there was a very brief mention, and Adi Heirani has passed away. That was it. And that was sort of the end for me, but I still had this thing of, I've got these vows, and I don't think you just drop them. And I was conflicted about that. So it just so happened that Don Stevens was in town, and we would go meet with Don when he would come to town. We'd pick him up and go to dinner and stuff. So I had the opportunity to talk to Don. I asked him about the Sufi vows and the importance of it, and he said, they're very important, except Baba made it very clear that if your conscience comes in conflict with your vows and you can't resolve it, you have to follow your conscience. So I said, that solves that issue for me, because I knew my conscience was in great conflict. And then Don talked to me about the early history. He said, I wanted to leave in 1952 because he had disagreements with Merida. He felt she was being dishonest. He didn't feel she was listening to what Baba wanted. And he asked Baba, could he leave? And Baba said no. And over the years, he asked 2 or 3 times. The last time was in 66 or 7, when he finally wrote a letter to Baba and said, I can't do it anymore. I've got it, please. And he never heard back from Baba. He was simply transferred to London. And he felt like that was Baba's answer to him. He told me that that Baba had made it explicitly that the Sufis were to discontinue the use of the Inayat Khan's graded papers, which were the Gitas and Gathas that were the lessons, the weekly lessons. And she didn't do it, and she argued with Baba back and forth for over a year and said basically Baba doesn't understand, that these are very important to our work. And so finally he gave in. And I realized at that time that I had been a Sufi for just over 3 years at the time, and never had I studied one word of Meher Baba in conjunction with my Sufis. Now I know that wasn't everybody's case, but in my class, we never studied anything of Baba. And I mean, the graded papers were fine, but I barely remember any of them. They were, compared to what Baba had to give, not much. So I wrote a letter to Ivy Deussen, asked to be released from my vows, and we were planning to go to India. And just before we left, I got the message that she had released me. So we took off for India with Brynner Mel, who I was very close to, who has been a Sufi for years, and his godson Ken Sturmer and David Mayaki. And when we got to India, in those days when you went to India, you took the taxi or whatever you did, you went straight to the trust compound. And we got out. Ursula was still a Sufi. We got out, and Mani came out and greeted us. And I told her I just resigned from Sufism. And she did this big sweeping handshake like that, and then that. So I kind of knew where we were going with that. So then I just remembered I had these pictures, so I thought it'd be fun to put them up there. And then I went to the Samadhi, And when I walked into Samadhi, I never really ever asked Baba anything. But this time I put my head down and I said, please, Baba, let nothing ever come between you and me. And the answer I got was pretty clear. Baba said, it's already given. Will you accept that? And I felt all the connections I had. I can't explain why, but I knew all the connections. It was like a net around me, just fell off. And that was it. I felt totally detached from the whole experience. And then, unexpectedly, we were asked to come to Merida that weekend. I think it was a Sunday, right? Thinking we were going to meet with Erich and Mani. And we walked in, and all the mandali were in this room. It was Francis's room, other than Mara. And Erich, just Ursula and I, Erich said, now, tell us everything. Looked at Ursula and said, and don't exaggerate. So we talked, and we told him everything that had happened. And I just gave him my experience, and Ursula gave me experience. And I remember Arnavas said, he's a clever hypnotist. We see this in India all the time. And Mani said, yeah, and it's somehow she alluded to the fact that it was his fault, and Erich said, no, it's her fault. She's the one who's allowed this to happen. And it was a funny thing that he said at that time. And there was probably some talk about it, and then a couple of days later, we got a message that we were to come to Merida on Friday, it's closed Friday, I think 2 o'clock or something like that. And when we got there was a few other people. Robert was there, and maybe Jack Small, and Mani, and Rano, and Erich. And Erich had said, I've written this letter. And basically, he said he went into Baba's in the morning like he did every morning and just put his head down, and he's just got this powerful thing that says, get out from here and write. And so that's what he did, and he wanted us to all sit around Mandali Hall, and he said, I'm going to read the letter out, and I want you all to listen, and I'm going to go around, and if you have anything to add or correct or anything you think. And so he did that, and we went around to each person, and they said what they said. And everything that was brought up, which was a lot of intelligent stuff, he'd already thought about that. I mean, the letter was sort of like Baba wrote the letter kind of deal. And that's when all the fireworks started. And he said he wanted Ivy Deuce to get the letter by post. And he gave us a copy, and he said, but please don't show it to anyone until she receives hers directly from me. So we carried the letter back. We just have a couple minutes.
Yeah. So after this meeting with the mandali, which was really, really heavy, it was many, many hours, and there were so many of them, it was so serious. And we told them everything we'd seen, we'd heard, what we knew firsthand, secondhand. It was really a powerful meeting, and it was not the kind of setup where you would make up stuff or lie about stuff or exaggerate. It was really serious. So then Erich wrote this letter to Ivy Deuce, and he gave us a copy, but there was a Sufi in India at the time. She had come with our group, but she really didn't know what was going on sort of behind the scenes with the mandali and us. But she knew that there was a letter written to Ivy Deuce. And immediately when she came back, she told Merida that there was this letter coming. It was mailed from the United States to her. It was carried to the United States and posted to her. So when we came back, I called her to make an appointment, and I saw her the next day, which was September 2nd, 1980. And I went to her home and told her that we had this meeting in India and what the mandali felt about Dr. Mackay. And she said, I understand there is a letter. And I said, yes, it's coming, but somehow it was interpreted like we were holding her letter hostage, which was not the case at all. But I explained to her my feelings about Mackay, which were supported by the mandali. And I told her that given, and she insisted that he's the full shilling and he's illumined and he's knows all this, and he's the one that she's been waiting for and all that. And I told her that I had no faith and trust in her, and part of the vow of becoming a Sufi is to faith and trust in the Murshid. And in her choosing of this man, I told her that I did not have faith and trust in her decision. And she released me of my vows, and she wished me a good life, and I said Jai Baba, and I never saw her again. And the rest of it, I think this afternoon, will be shared when the Sufis then sent a group of 5 there to argue her case or their case. So then the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
I finished with this. I wrote a letter in September 1980 to Merida, who I always had great respect for, so I didn't want anybody to think that I disrespected her. But September 18th, 1980, a letter to Merida Ivy Deuce from Ed van Buskirk. Dear Merida, for what it's worth, I want to give you my impression of what transpired during my recent visit in India. Ira had suggested that this might be useful, so here it is for you to regard or disregard as you like. I've spent many hours reconstructing meetings and conversations I had with the mandali, individually as well as collectively. I have made lists of specific points which were at issue and listened to tapes which I and others made of certain meetings and talks. After a lot of thought and effort, I feel I can safely and honestly say that the sum of all talks and conversations boil down to one paragraph of Meher Baba's warning issued in July 1968. It is equally important at this critical period of the Avataric age to beware at all times of persons who lead others into believing that they are saintly and pious and possess supernatural powers. However pious such persons appear to be, a Baba lover must never mix such piety with the divinity of the avatar. The apparent piety of Dr. Mackay is being liberally mixed with the divinity of Avatar Meher Baba within Sufism Reoriented. Through public lectures, selective invitation, and private interviews, this mixture is actively being made available for the rest of the Baba community to sample. The spilling over of this brew from within the confines of Sufism Reoriented has prompted an increasing flow of inquiries to be directed to the mandali regarding the authenticity of this vintage. They have seen the intoxicating and disquieting effect this has had on many who are close in their love for him. What else can they say but that Baba had clearly warned of such intoxicants, that this is not the pure wine of which he so often spoke, but a bootleg, adulterated version which should be avoided because of harmful side effects. Since this is completely contradictory to everything they have ever heard from beloved Baba, and since they witnessed time and again his reaction to just this kind of indulgence, they have no hesitancy to say that this is not at all pleasing to him. They feel that you have definitely overstepped the boundaries of whatever charge Meher Baba gave you. But since you are in charge of Sufism as reoriented by him, the responsibility is yours alone. If, as I have heard, you are reacting to this situation as if the mandali are attacking you, then you are reading the situation most inaccurately. It is not their words which have any meaning, but beloved Baba's wish and words which are so flagrantly being disregarded. All discussions I had with the mandali were tempered with love and remembrance of the beloved. Constantly, they reminded us of Baba's reminder to them that this is all his divine game, which he alone enjoys at his own cost. I must emphasize to you the lack of rancor or bitter feelings expressed by the mandali toward anyone, most especially toward you. In his love, Edvan Buskirk.